Good afternoon, everybody. It was more fun listening than coming here to talk. So my presentation contributes to this discussion about the macro imbalances, financial imbalances that countries are facing by focusing on the issue of capital flight. 3 points first. I want to make sure that our discussion is not sounding as if tinkling around the way debt financing is done, we're going to have salvation. External borrowing, to me, is no salvation for developing countries, and we'll show you why. Already, his numbers show very clearly that, and your numbers show that more money is going out than is coming in. So the notion of scaling up debt, to me, is not palatable. Okay? So we need to look at more options that make it possible for developing countries, especially, to overcome the debt trap, but also to raise funding for sustainable development, including climate change. Sorry for sounding pessimistic, but I don't see aid tripling, I don't see debt becoming better, I don't see all those things happening. So, first of all, I'm going to make a presentation that draws on the work that Jim Boyce and I have been doing for 3 decades. He has done it longer than me. And it's actually, somebody was talking about progress. I see this as progress, that we have a conversation about how bad finance is for developing countries. Because that's what we saw. I mean, in econ, wherever 101 or 104, I don't know which one it is, we tell students the financial markets are the best to allocate resources, right? That funds go to the best users. Because we're at UMass. But what we found is that that's not how it actually works. So I'm going to share some of the evidence coming out from this trend of work we have done, the published work we have done. Most of the evidence is from the most recent book we published 2 years ago already. But I also want to I'll draw on some insights from the ongoing work funded by the Carnegie Foundation that's following up on the work we're doing here. This one is on again, a case studies on Cameroon, Ghana, and Zambia. So when you talk about Zambia, I'm there. So in terms of context, capital flight, we see it as basically a continuation of the plunder of resources by the colonial regime before, but that's not now perpetuated by multinational corporations. So before it was the states that were extracting wealth, but now it's the corporations. And if we think about mobilizing finance for development, mobilizing finance for climate change financing, we need to think seriously about how we deal with the issue of capital flight. And I show you some numbers to illustrate that. So regarding external borrowing, we need to really change the course because increasing external borrowing is not going to help. What we need to do is to see how developing countries can generate more resources and actually keep it and use it. Here's a headline from the recent IMF Regional Economic Outlook that was launched last month, talking about how African countries are under financial stress. And then these are different ways of presenting the numbers that have been presented, how debt burden is rising, current account deficits deepening, and at the same time, these are countries that are exporting a lot of minerals. We talk about oil booms, commodity booms, and then during those booms, you see deficits rising. And one of the implications is stress on the on the foreign exchange markets, which manifested in chronic current foreign exchange rates depreciation. I was talking to my colleague Dozie from Ghana. The Ghanaian CD is, you wake up in the morning, it has depreciated more than it was. It used to be a very, very stable currency. And many countries now have a huge problem with shortage of essential goods like fuel, medicine, and so on. Now, what's the solution? The solution is calling for international support and solidarity. And so reforms will take time. In the meantime, countries in sub-Saharan Africa will need support from the international community. The estimated gross financing needs for low-income countries in the region is about $70 billion a year. And the call is to get those 70 to come from somewhere else. I don't believe it. It won't come. So we need to talk about capital flight. Because the reason Africa is being seen as a country that needs external financing is not because it's not able to generate resources. It does, except they go abroad. These are estimates of capital flight with 30 countries from 70 to 2018. And you can see that clearly it's not a new phenomenon. African countries have been hemorrhaging for a long time, but it's getting worse. Again, going to Econ 1 or something. Post-1995, Africa's economic performance actually has improved significantly in terms of growth rates and macroeconomic balances. So you would imagine that these economies would be attractive for investment. But how come investment is going abroad? Funds are going abroad instead of coming abroad. Well, because the returns, we're talking about returns to investment, they should be better and higher when the economies are booming. But at the same time, capital flight is rising, which means that capital flight, my friends, is not driven by rational portfolio management. It's money that goes abroad because people want to hide it away. It's not because they want higher returns. Okay. So just to summarize, on the left-hand side, you have the total cumulative amount of capital flight compared to inflows, ODA, remittances, FDI. For over that period, basically Africa lost 2 trillion. I heard trillions many times today. 2 trillion compared to what they have received in aid. And yet Africa is viewed as the aid-dependent, highly indebted continent. It's much, they have sent to the rest of the world much more than they have received. That's the story. On the right-hand side, you have on an annual average, what the continent is receiving versus what it is giving to the rest of the world. 60 billion on average. Some estimates have it up to 80 billion. Like the ECA's estimates, which is broader, includes what they call illicit financial flows, all of them. It would be in the 80 billion range. Now let's come back to solidarity. So the world needs to give $70 billion per year to Africa, while it receives 60 billion from Africa. The math doesn't work. If the world really wants to help Africa, refuse the money coming from Africa, for God's sake. You say, no, Africa, you need that money. Don't bring it here. Okay? And that will balance the books, because Africa can then finance climate change, education, and all that. So, and then when you look at which countries are suffering the most, they are the countries actually that have the highest financing, resource generation capacity, the resource-rich countries. Oil, minerals, and so on. So once again, Africa is short of development financing, not because it has no means of generating it, but it's generating it, it's feeding the global financial system. This is from the book. We're looking at the cases of Angola, Cote d'Ivoire, and South Africa. One of the presentations today was showing how the countries are spending more on interest payment than on health and so on. Here, compare what the countries are spending to what is leaking out of the country every year. So for Angola, on an annual basis, 4.2 billion goes out as capital flight. They're spending 2.3 billion on health. If they could keep that, they would multiply the amount of money they spend on health. Same for South Africa, Ivory Coast, and so on. So once again, African countries have the means to generate money that they need to finance their development. But the reason they don't have enough is because somebody else is getting the benefit of that. This picture is a good illustration of what's happening. Cote d'Ivoire is number one producer of cocoa. And cocoa is a highly priced commodity. Many people during the break, you get your chocolate, you get your tea, your drink with all kinds of fun stuff. When you do that, think about who is getting the benefit of that. Because the value of cocoa is estimated by the value of the last product, the final product from cocoa. We see chocolate and all those products. So when we look at the distribution of the revenue from the milk chocolate bar, 51% goes to processors, 28% to distributors. This is important because for Ivory Coast, it's the cocoa sector, unlike Ghana, thanks Ghana, the cocoa sector is fully privatized. And it's really basically controlled by foreign multinational corporations. So here we're talking about the rewards for growing coffee going to multinational corporations. So even though cocoa growers are producing cocoa and exporting, that's what comes back to the country. It's what belongs to the Ivorian entities. The producers and the small businesses, they get very little. The producers get 4%. After all the sweat and all that. The other feature other thing we profile in the book is that capital flight happens because it's a big operation that involves many actors. It involves those who benefit from extractions, but also those who help. And these include banks, consulting firms, legal law firms that help the companies, the rent seekers who extract the money to take it away from the country and hide it abroad. You can see the list. If you're not here, then I don't know what you're doing. You won't get rich. You have to make the list here. So let me just give a few illustrations of how capital flight is related to the issue of balance of payment stress. So a country experiences balance of payment stress when it is not receiving enough foreign exchange to allow them to cover their foreign liabilities. Okay? That means the country is not wealthy enough. But what we look at the numbers, actually, African countries are very wealthy. No, some Africans are very wealthy. These are estimates of private wealth by country, and we put it together with capital flight. This table I created when I was presenting the case on Ghana. So for Ghana, for example, that means that there is about 56 billion private wealth floating somewhere in the world. Our estimate of capital flight from Ghana has a stock of 50 billion. Most of it some of the wealth could be in Ghana, but some of it is also offshore. Point is, there is money in Africa that can finance development. We just need to find where it is. Okay? The other interesting case for Ghana was that actually private wealth was growing faster than the economy. Yes. Good. Trade is one way to generate foreign exchange reserves. The problem with African countries is that they do export. They do export, but two things happen. There are many things that happen. Two things I want to. For a country to benefit from exports, the companies need to export, the companies need to bring the foreign exchange into the country. The foreign exchange need to be available for spending in the country. One phenomenon that happens that we observe is that companies under-report their exports, which we call under-invoicing. So exports could increase, but the central bank is not seeing an increase in foreign reserves. The second phenomenon we're going to document now more in the current studies is that what I call exporting is not earning foreign exchange. If a company that's exploiting gold in Ghana is exporting gold and keeping 75% abroad, what's in it for Ghana? That's what happens. When the companies come, they negotiate what they call development agreements, which include, among other things, a negotiation of how much they can retain of the foreign exchange abroad. And the argument is they need to pay expenditures, they need to pay their loans, and so on. But the point is that you will see then a country, ironically, paradoxically, with an export boom with a depreciating currency because they don't have enough foreign exchange coming into the country. Another piece of evidence that we use here is to show that, again, on many fronts, debt is not the solution for African financing. One is because that when we look at actually, when we do the numbers, Africa is not indebted to the rest of the world. It's the other way around. This graph shows you, compares the stock of capital flight abroad with the money that Africa owes to the rest of the world. So, and the green bar is the difference. So Africa's wealth stashed abroad minus the loans they owe to the rest of the world. Positive net assets held abroad, which means that Africa could expunge the debt that they owe to the rest of the world and still remain with some. So that changed the conversation about debt. The other point we have made in our work is that one other reason why I'm skeptical of debt as a solution to financing development is that some of the loans that are borrowed by governments are actually financing, part of them are financing capital flight. Our statistical analysis show that on average, out of every dollar that comes to Africa, 60 cents goes out as capital flight. Now, of course, Africans have to pay the whole dollar, even though they didn't benefit from it, which is why we argue that some of the loans that Africa is paying is odious, in the sense that it did not benefit development as was in the contract. And the responsibility is shared between the lenders and the borrowers. Because as a lender, you are required to do due diligence and also follow through the use of the resources. And if they don't do that, then they should also share the responsibility of the rate being canceled and not being repaid. Yes, policies. One, it's clear that we need to change the conversation, because the kind of solidarity we're asking for coming from the donors and creditors is wrong-headed. It's basically trapping African countries again and again in debt, because I don't see why the outcomes will be different. It's like the former Prime Minister of Ethiopia once said in a meeting, says, I don't know what's wrong with that as African leaders. We keep saying, doing the same things, hoping that there will be a different outcome. No, the outcomes will be the same. The solutions have to be global, both from the source and the destination. Many times when we talk about capital flight from Africa, people dismiss it and say it's just a result of corruption on the Africa side. African people are corrupt. I said, yes, let's do a thought experiment. Imagine a world where there's only one continent that's corrupt. Where would the money go from that continent? If the rest of the world is not corrupt, why don't they refuse the money coming from African countries? Open your bank accounts and we see where African money is. Then we need to deal with the head-on, with the debt-fueled capital flight by enforcing responsible lending and borrowing, because increasing debt is not a viable option. We need to advocate for debt audit, which means that we do an examination of the kind of loans that African countries have received. Where did they come from? What did they finance? Did they finance the project they were supposed to finance? If that is the case, then they could be repaid. If they disappears in somebody's pocket, then the people, it's actually the people of Africa should not be responsible for repaying. They should be cancelled through under the doctrine of odious debt. Once again, sorry for being pessimistic, I don't see scaling up debt being a solution to financing climate change or anything in Africa. Thank you.